Hi, this is Paul Corrigan here with Dr. Erec Smith from York College, Associate Professor of Rhetoric and Composition, co-editor of The Making of Barack Obama, The Politics of Persuasion, and author of the recent book, A Critique of Antiracism in Rhetoric and Composition, The Semblance of Empowerment, which he has agreed to talk with me about today. Thanks so much, Erec.
You're welcome so much. I hope I remember what I wrote. I was going over it last night and I was like, this is the first time I've read this since I published it. So that is not good. But I started reading a little bit and I started to, recognize some of my ideas. So it's all good.
Okay. Well, and if not, I can point us to page numbers and we'll get we can.
That's fine.
Refresh ourselves. I want to say that I have some disagreements with what you've written here, and I don't want to begin with those. And instead, precisely because of those disagreements, rather than in spite of them, I want to begin with some common ground. So a key concept in your book is empowerment. Specifically, you have in mind psychological empowerment. Which, if I'm understanding correctly, and you can correct me if I'm not, it's about the attitudes that we might adopt and the actions we might take as individuals to develop and exert personal agency and responsibility in our own lives, and that includes in our inner lives as well as our interactions with other people. Is that about right? And whether or not that's right, what in your life led you to a sense that this was a really important value, this sort of empowerment?
Well, it's not just about individuality, right? That's one component of this three-part theory. There's the intrapersonal, which is, basically how we use rhetoric with ourselves, right? To build self-efficacy and a positive self-regard, and ultimately what's called a secure base in attachment theory and other aspects of psychology. But then we get into the interactional, which is about dealing with other individuals, understanding the dynamics of a particular discourse community, for example, understanding shared values, attitudes, and beliefs, understanding where those things are not shared, and dealing with ways of going about dealing with that. And then the behavioral, the final component, is about getting things done. So how do we work together as teams to actually affect change? How did I come about empowerment theory? That's a very complicated answer, because I came about it from studying all kinds of other things, right? In internal rhetoric, Buddhist philosophy. And some of it came from experience, but not in the way people think. In a past life, I was a diversity officer.
Okay.
And, I would do and notice, when doing diversity trainings and things like that, that we seem to be starting, a little bit down the road than we should have been starting, right? We were diving straight into the how do we get along, in this environment? How do we get along interpersonally? And people showed up to that with, guards up, right? They show up, staunchly determined to disagree. They show up fearing to say something because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I realized that, and I really realized that when I came upon empowerment theory, we're skipping arguably the most important part, the intrapersonal. We're going straight to the interactional and maybe the behavioral, but we're skipping the intrapersonal. We're skipping where we need to create our own secure base somehow. That way, when we go into these situations, we're not going in with a guard up so much, and we're not going in with this fear of being wrong, right? We can go in and be wrong, and that's that, because the confluence of Buddhist philosophy with empowerment theory, especially the interpersonal is non-attachment, really. Adaptability and non-attachment. I really focus on adaptability in the book, and less about non-attachment until the conclusion, but that's going to be an aspect of my next book.
What's your next book?
I'm parsing out empowerment theory. I'm taking chapter 2 and making it a whole book. Basically.
Okay.
And I'm going to focus a little bit more on the behavioral component as the pedagogical component. So I'll talk about problem-based learning and outward-facing pedagogy, as well as kind of like for lack of a better phrase right now, the primary telos of empowerment theory. So that's what I'm working on right now. I'm co-writing that, actually. So I'll have that section on empowerment, and somebody else will talk about other things.
That sounds exciting. But the next thing I want to ask you then is kind of the current social justice movement, anti-racist movement, tends to downplay those kind of intrapersonal elements, especially that empowerment theory stresses, that you are stressing in empowerment theory. And I understand why. There's this history of individualism or maybe hyper individualism, as you mentioned, someone using that term in the book, has kind of used, like, if you're poor, that's your fault, as a way to like deflect from, oh, actually it's the tax structure's fault. My bad. Right, and right, so we can kind of blame individuals. So I get the downplaying of the interpersonal and the individual, but I guess what I'm hearing from empowerment theory is there doesn't have to be a contradiction between paying attention to the individual and paying attention to the social. Like, we can do both.
Yeah, we can definitely do both. I mean, there's a lot of black and white thinking in social justice activism, in my opinion, and I think that's a shame. When it comes to individuality, the reason why empowerment theory is not hyper individuality is because there's kind of a checks and balances going on here. The interpersonal is about the individual, but you have to have all three components of empowerment to be truly empowered. So the interactional makes sure that the interpersonal doesn't become hyper individual, right? And the behavioral component that is actually doing things out in the world makes sure that the interactional doesn't become prefigurative politics, right? Just performing with no concrete goal. So they watch each other, right? Each one makes sure the other one doesn't go off the rails.
I think that's really helpful. My own thinking is that drastic reductionism and probably some unhelpful both-siderism. But if I can indulge that for a moment, is that the great mistake of conservatism is to forget that we are social beings. And the great mistake of progressivism is to forget that we're individuals, and that, like, both of those things are true.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
Another important thing that I think we agree on is the importance of disagreement. So in the preface of your book, you stress, I can only tell you that I seek truth and justice, and I write this book solely from that interest. I genuinely hope people will read, engage, and critique it to their heart's content. I want to know why they agree or disagree with my conclusions. One of the main motivations for this book is to encourage a productive and generative approach to disagreement and discourage attempts to silence, shut down, or shame others into submission. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you so much about this book is that I think, like you, I'm concerned that there be room for disagreement. That I worry about too much agreement, almost. Even if I'm the one doing the too much agreement, like a little flag goes up and says, all right, there's got to be room. What am I not thinking of? And that I want there to be like anti-racisms plural, right? That there's got to be space for disagreement. This seems really important to you as well.
Yeah, very important. There are anti-racisms, plural. You wouldn't know it in the past couple of years, but there are. Um, I'm trying to, in the next book, I'm going to try to do empowerment theory as a alternative um, anti-racism as well. And obviously anti-racist pedagogy when it comes to problem-based learning and things like that. But I'm presenting this as an alternative to anti-racism that tends to be influenced by critical race theory. There are other people out there who are doing other anti-racisms as well, ones that are not, they don't come up under the purview of Kendi or D'Angelo or something like that. They're doing different things. Some people are doing things comparable to what I'm trying to do. The Greater Good Science Center has a take on diversity and anti-racism that is not this and more akin to what I'm trying to do. Chloe Valdery's theory of enchantment. She actually does, please Google that and check her out. She goes around and does anti-racist trainings and things like that, is, okay, I'll say it this way, is anti-racism, right? And when I say anti-racism there, I mean the prevalent CRT-based anti-racism.
Trademarked version.
Yeah, it's anti that. And then there's the Equiano Project, which gets into a different take on anti-racism. All of these, as opposed to what's going on now, they still have a respect for classical liberal values. Not just equality, obviously, but reason, freedom, individuality, right? Deliberation, right? A belief in the power of dialectic and disagreement. They all seem to be doing that. I'm doing that as well, right? And there are a lot of contemporary mainstream, I guess I'll call it, anti-racism has a inherent distrust of classical liberal values because they see them as perpetuating white supremacy. And I see why they come to that conclusion, but I don't buy it 100%.
So I probably buy it a lot more than you do. So just if we can say anti-racism trademark to say not just against racism, but a specific brand of being against racism. Well, I see responsibility and individuality and reason trademark, right? Yeah. That, well, there's specific ways of framing those that aren't neutral. And so I probably don't agree with you on that, but I think we ought to be able to talk about it.
Right. Yeah. I'm having fun.
At the same time, the next thing I want to ask you about is I think that like neither of us would probably suggest that all disagreements ought to be entertained. So if somebody is like espousing just an outright, blatant, overt racist idea.
Oh yeah, if somebody's saying I'm subhuman, that's not.
Yeah, and they can't hide behind, hey, agree to disagree. It's a disagreement. You have to respect my disagreement.
You brought up things a couple of times regarding what exactly does beyond the pale mean.
That's exactly my question. I was going to quote you on that. So you used that phrase. Well, yeah. Let me just quote you on it, and then hear what you were going to say. Okay. Or do you want to go and say what you were going to say?
Well, I was just going to bring up that I'm paying attention. You mentioned that in the WPAL listserv a couple of years ago, and I think you mentioned it today on Facebook.
I did mention it today. I had forgotten about the earlier one.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Where's the line? And I didn't have time to read the thread on Facebook, so I don't know what conclusions people came to. But that's tough. And I mean, when you're denying somebody's humanity, I think that's a pretty bold line.
Right.
Hard one to miss.
So that very phrase, denying someone's humanity or denying someone's existence, right? There's a lot of ways to interpret it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, like, if you straight out say, I deny your humanity, that's obviously pretty clear. But I think the phrase denying somebody's humanity or someone's humanity is not up for debate sometimes gets applied to circumstances where, right, maybe the idea was racist, but maybe it was a different kind of racist. Like,
Yeah.
I was denying your something else, not your humanity. So I wonder, like, even that we get, okay, there's the line,
Yeah.
but then where's that get applied?
You were denying my ability to do math or something.
Yeah, or and so yeah. So I guess it just that you say you talk about people getting jettisoned from the team for critical inquiries and opinions that come nowhere near being beyond the pale on 48. And so I'm like, okay, so there's a pale. There is a pale. We agree some people ought to be jettisoned. At some point, some ideas, like, you're not on the team. And I think probably everybody agrees there's a pale somewhere.
Yeah.
And so then what happens is, right, so then I think what happens sometimes is somebody will be determined to be beyond the pale, and then their response is, you can't handle disagreement. Mm-hmm. And nobody can handle certain disagreements, and everybody can handle some disagreements, and everybody's just putting the pale in a different place. And so then what gets framed as you can't handle disagreements is really just, we disagree on which disagreements are beyond the pale. Is that making, do you think that happens?
I think that's making sense. Yeah, there are some things that, just aren't on the table regarding what we can talk about, and some things are, even if they are annoying, right? Or something we find egregious.
So I think this is what happens to you sometimes, is you will be considered to be beyond the pale. And you're like, I'm not beyond the pale. And so what feels like to you no room for debate, from the other person's perspective, is there is room for debate, just not that much, not enough room for you.
I guess so, yes. So you're saying the other person is saying there's room for debate, but not for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Does that matter, or is?
Well, I mean, it matters in that I think it's antithetical to academia. If I was thinking about applying to graduate school and somebody told me that this is academia now, people thinking about, creating stricter moderation rules for WPAL because, I wanted proof, or not even proof, but just more information about something that happened before I boycott something. If I was told that, I probably wouldn't have gone into graduate school. The point is to have conversations. The point is to, engage in dialectic, right? Otherwise, how do you grow? And otherwise, how do you, test your theories? I think a lot of people are turned off when they get a question they can't answer, because they're turned off by getting questions they can't answer. If they would just get into that conversation, they understand their own ideas more. They may even listen to somebody else and realize they have to revise their ideas. That may happen. This is academia is it's a living creature, right? And if you can't have these conversations, then it's inanimate, right? And academia is no longer a life of the mind kind of situation. It's a glorified book club. And you can't say anything bad about the books.
Or anything good about the books, depending on which books.
Yeah, right. I don't think they read books they hate.
Okay, now I do want to turn to something that I really like. I had a really strong reaction to, negative reaction.
I can't wait.
Okay. So I guess a couple, it's a really central idea in your book, this idea of the sacred victim.
Yeah.
And so I want to read kind of a 3 or 4, short paragraph here that, well, it's not politically correct to be offended. I was offended, but I want to talk about it.
It's fine that you were offended.
So on 19, you, in the preface somewhere, I have this quote written out. You say the victim persona in anti-racism in rhetoric and composition in the present. The victim persona is lauded as heroic, if not in a way sacred. And then on 19, you expand that. You take that metaphor further. You say the sacred victim, and you call it a metaphor on 19. The sacred victim cannot be questioned, challenged, or engaged in civil debate. To do so is tantamount to sacrilege. His or her victimhood is all the argument needed. No critical thinking is necessary. And the guilt and genuflection from hegemonic others is the proper mode of worship. Information that would end the downtrodden and unfortunate status of the victim is often shunned as sin or interpreted as a more covert and insidious oppression. So that was really a jarring passage to me, and I want to interrogate it as you've asked. So I've got multiple questions.
Okay.
And the first is, like, I'm assuming, but maybe incorrectly, that your intention here is not to mock or belittle people who have been harmed. And so, if that assumption is correct,
yeah,
certainly that kind of language could reasonably be taken in that way anyway. So why are you using such charged metaphoric language?
Well, that's why I say the sacred victim. That's a different thing than somebody who actually has been victimized. I'm not a big fan of the concept creep regarding things like trauma and harm and things like that, because even trigger warnings come from actual PTSD from soldiers coming back from war. Now it's something that happens if you might hear a word you don't like. I'm not a big fan of that. So those people coming back from war, real victims. The person who can't hear the N-word in reference to something that happened, who can't read the N-word in a Martin Luther King passage when he says it, that's what I'm talking about when I say sacred victim.
Okay. So the next question on the same passage is that it strikes me as extremely similar to comments I've heard from folks who want to kind of be dismissive or downplay racism altogether. Stuff like, they just want to be victims, or they're just playing the victim card. What distinguishes the stance you're taking from here from that kind of popular idea of victimhood that as something, as a derogatory, dismissive?
The rest of the book, I would
say.
That's you're reading something, and I don't even remember what context, what chapter it's in, but the rest of the book talks about the the possible cause and the detriments of victim mentality. The cause is a kind of disempowerment represented by what I call a primacy of identity.
Yeah, that's the chapter.
Right. Okay. And a primacy of identity is just you're dismissing everything outside of you, because I don't know, it's scary, you don't want to deal with it, or things like that. And it's all about you and your self-expression, and not about interacting with other people. I think that's a detrimental idea, and that comes out of a victim mentality. The fact that I have no agency, right? Everybody's against me. I live in what Scott Lanienfield calls negative emotionality, right? And I have a self-constructed deterministic screen that selects certain things and deflects other things at all times to fit into a particular narrative that I'm abiding by, right? And that narrative is, we are the downtrodden, they're the bad guys, they owe us something, right? And I think that attitude, that terministic screen does more harm than good. It stifles progress. It does not enhance progress. It stifles conversation, does not enhance conversation, right? And aspects of the primacy of identity help with that, especially the idea of untouchable lived experience, right? Which is kind of goes back to WPAL a couple of weeks ago. Was it a couple of weeks? Was it last week? Oh, wait, whatever. So, and it gets into that as well. I mean, you can't, somebody says, this happened to me, so you should do this, that, or the other thing. I mean, if you're telling me to do something based on your story, I'm gonna need, you know, I need more concrete information before I base my actions on what you're talking about, right? Lived experience coupled with, you know, what I was asking for, I think last week, more information and things like that, that's a different story. It can supplement other things. Other things can supplement it. But when you say, this is my truth, so, you know, I don't care about your truth, right? I think that's a problem. And I think that comes out of looking at the world as this awful place, and that you are, you know, the downtrodden, you know, who can't possibly get ahead. And it really bothers me when we tell others, especially students, that they should feel that way.
So I think what my next question then is, so how you're saying the sacred victim is not the actual victim. So if someone is actually a victim and they're saying, hey, this harm has been done to me,
Yes.
then this critique you're saying doesn't apply to those people.
No. No, a victim of domestic violence is a victim, right? And that has to be taken care of. That has to be dealt with. You're not a victim if somebody says something you don't agree with.
Well, it depends on what the thing is.
Yes, it depends. Well, okay, let's parse that out a little bit. If somebody says something like, calls me a subhuman or something like that, right? I cannot like that, and I can tell that guy to go screw himself. But I have no feelings of victimhood. Not at all. And I don't know what that says about me, but I am by no means, I'm not a victim. I'm better than that person. You know, I haven't been hurt and harmed by that person. That person tried to harm me and failed. And there are too many people out there. I mean, forget about subhuman. There are people who get upset and call themselves victims because you ask them to elaborate more. You know, I can't get down with that. And that is becoming not an aberration, but the norm in this field, especially when it comes to social justice and anti-racism specifically.
So a key part of your description of the sacred victim is that it is someone who can't be questioned or debated with or challenged.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, I mean, I'm assuming you'd agree that there's a timing to these things, right? That in some moments when someone has been harmed, it wouldn't be appropriate, or to use a word you use later in the book, kairotic, to turn that moment of testimony, say, into a debate.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of things that we ignore when it comes to anti-racism and things like that is context. Right. We tend to ignore that a lot. I think the concept of context is kryptonite to mainstream anti-racism. There are other things that are kryptonite as well. We can get into that a little bit more. But gauging the situation and acting accordingly you know, is something you have to do. We can't have these, you know, I mean, some things I guess are universal, but many things depend on what is happening in that particular situation. It is kairotic, you know, and you know, like the use of the N-word. In what context was it used, right? Was somebody referring to somebody else saying it? Was somebody reading a passage from Martin Luther King when he said it, right? These are contextual considerations. There are people out there who are like, nope, always wrong. And I think that's disempowering.
It's interesting that you would describe context as the kryptonite, because my understanding is what anti-racism brought to the discussion was context, right? That you just look at an incident in isolation, these 5 minutes, this is what happened. Now let's zoom out and look at the entire historical context that created the conditions for that incident to happen. So it's interesting that you would say, so I guess maybe there's ever expanding rings of context, and you're wanting to focus on a more local context.
I think we're missing the more local context. Historical context is important. I think we're focusing too much on that. I think we're bringing interpretations with us to new situations and applying that to the new situation instead of looking at the new situation, right? I think a term I use in the book is called reality testing, right? We're not dealing with the situation at hand. We're projecting something that happened last week to this situation, or last month, or in the 60s, you know, or something like that. And I think that's a mistake.
So the last thing that I want to ask you about this specific passage, and I'm kind of focusing on it because I think it was, and I almost thought that I should have you read it, because like it felt like dripping with, and I thought like satire or mockery, and I thought, well, you know, maybe if you read it, it actually wouldn't sound that way. And then I thought, well, maybe it would, and then I thought, well, it's not be fair to put you on the spot and assign a tone to it. But I do think this is a particularly sharp or biting passage that speaks to some of the larger ideas. That's why I'm sticking with. I'm hoping I'm not being nitpicky.
Okay.
But in any group there are outliers, and so I would not be surprised at all if in Rhetoric and Composition's Antiracism there is in fact some particular actual example that fits your description. Like you can't question the sacred victim exactly the way that you describe it. But you don't provide an example in the book. And you also don't say that you're trying to describe outliers. You're saying this is a fitting description overall of how anti-racism works in Rhetoric and Composition right now. And I was a little aghast at such a sweeping statement with so little like documentary evidence. So would you say that this is your impression? Is there evidence you didn't present? Is it an accumulation of anecdotes?
I had an entire chapter that Lexington made me take out because it was too damning. They said we don't want to do this. We want you to take this out. I had evidence. I had lots of evidence. I changed the names. I used pseudonyms, but that didn't matter.
So they were concerned of like libel suits or something.
I guess, although everything was, I had proof that it actually happened.
Okay, but they didn't want you attacking people because.
Well, they didn't. They wanted people to actually like the book. You know, they wanted people to buy it instead of one person buying it, telling people what happened. And I get that. But yes, Paul, I had evidence.
Well,
boy, did I want to publish it.
Well, that is useful to know about that kind of behind the scenes publishing decision. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. My my next, and I guess nearly last question, I'm moving on from the passage, is about your concept of reality testing that you just mentioned. And in the book, you define it as the ability or desire to acknowledge the world as it is. And so your critique then, based on the concept of reality testing of current anti-racism, is that it doesn't do reality testing. It ignores the real world. It's not realistic. And my thought is that this is, as a scholar of pedagogy, this is like a major problem for almost every pedagogy. Like, we actually have very little evidence about how any pedagogy affects students 10, 20, like out in the real world. And so if just to pick the same example that you focused a chapter on, if code meshing pedagogy doesn't have empirical evidence of its effectiveness in the lives of students later after school, welcome to the club. Like lots of pedagogies don't, including your proposed alternative of empowerment pedagogy. So I seems to me you're saying current anti-racism is not realistic, or rejects reality, and empowerment pedagogy embraces reality. But isn't it more accurate to say, like, to you, empowerment pedagogy seems more realistic? That it's not a matter of anti-racist pedagogy rejecting reality and you have access to reality, so much as there's two different perspectives on what the world is like, and then we can argue about which one's more accurate. But this idea that anti-racists are rejecting reality and you've got reality seems like an overstatement.
Well, I'm not really talking about, I'm talking more generally, right? I'm talking about, proofs, that empirical proof that something's happening that people ignore because it doesn't fit the narrative.
Okay.
All right, that's what I'm talking about. And I hate to bring this up because A, is cliche, and B, is depressing. But murders in this country, often done by people of the same race against each other.
Yeah.
We talk about is white against black. That's all we talk about. And when you see the numbers about black on black in an inner city and things like that, that is basically ignored because that doesn't fit this narrative that we like, that we're using to get what we want and what we need. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about this lack of reality testing. That also goes back to my concept of prefiguration, right? When people are living out the world they want to see, in the outer world, but they don't have any concrete strategies for dealing with it. So they have their blinders on. They're in their own insular circle, right? And in that insular circle, the laws of physics are different. Logic means something else. Sometimes up is down. Jonathan Smucker, somebody who is local actually, and somebody I reference a lot in the book, talked about his experience with Occupy Wall Street, and the idea that there are some commonsensical things that needed to be done that the group didn't want to do because that smacked of liberalism, like getting a permit so that the activist children can be taken care of in a certain space, right? Permit, that's what the man does. That's what the man makes us do, right? So this idea, that we have to stick to, our particular prefigurative narrative, right, and not deal with concrete realities is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I still understand what you're talking about. It just seems to me that that's just not an accurate distinction, that anti-racists are dealing with concrete realities, just seeing them differently than you.
No, they're not. The epilogue, for example. All right. I'll write something.
Yeah.
And it's thoroughly changed because the reality of my statement wasn't fitting the narrative. Right? I mean, you don't have to read the whole thing now, but.
Yeah, I was just kind of glancing at it again.
And obviously we have different interpretations of the world and things like that. And I
Sure.
talked about deterministic screens earlier, right? So, you know, those are, you know, constructions in which we deflect some things and select other things for sure. But I mean, I've seen people just basically lie about something that just happened because it doesn't fit the narrative, right? The Evergreen State College documentary that you can find on YouTube, the complete Evergreen story, is a perfect example of this. Not only do they lie about what happened, they take footage of what actually happened and put it online. Like, they're giving you proof that they lied. I mean, that's how out of it, you know, the activists were. I've seen that in other situations. From other faculty, from students, you know, and that's what I'm talking about. This shaping, this curating of the world so that it fits the narrative that you prefer, right? And what fair-minded critical thinking is, and I reference Richard Paul a lot in the book. What fair-minded critical thinking is you know, looking at something regardless of, you know, the outcome. You're looking for the truth. This is Charles Peirce, the original pragmatist as well, with abduction. You're going into something and you're looking, you know, you're gonna find what you find, all right? Sophistic critical thinking, on the other hand, is I'm going to, enact, you know, epistemological rigor insofar as it fits what I want to know, or what I want other people to know, insofar as it fits the narrative, right? When I talk about reality testing, I'm talking about people who abide by sophistic critical thinking, other than fair-minded critical thinking. And that also gets into the interactional component of empowerment, because when you go into a situation and you're reacting and you allow conversation and things and truths to emerge, instead of going there deciding, okay, I got to find things to fit my truth, right? Then that's different, and that's more akin to empowerment. So that's what I'm talking about with reality testing.
I guess
This has a lot of layers.
I am not, you haven't convinced me, or I'm not convinced
That's
that
fine. See the
one group,
difference? You're not convinced, so I don't hate you.
yeah.
You
But
know?
I think we're all prone to that, and within any, right, just within anti-racism, just as much as within anti-racism, that there are people who resist those tendencies better than others, and that you know, any given thinker on any given day can be more or less likely to critically, right? You know, what time of. And so I guess I'm not convinced that that is a fault of anti-racism.
Are you saying it's individual and not group?
Yeah, I guess I am saying that.
Okay. Yeah, I disagree.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an ideology, especially if you look at the Robin DiAngelo's tenets of anti-racism and everything that happens there. The most famous one is, it's not whether racism happened, it's how it manifested in that situation, right? So if you look at something and say, oh, I don't really see racism here, you know, you're a problem. You're a problem, and you are going to be told you're a problem, right? You have to fall in line. This is groupthink. And I mean, that's what it is. You know, not everybody, I guess. There are some people here and there who aren't abiding by that, but they stay quiet because if they voice that they're not abiding by that, they get canceled. There is an ideology. There is a new vocabulary. Diversity, racism, inclusion, they don't mean what they used to mean. Now they mean something else. And if you don't abide by the new meaning, you're bad.
You're beyond the pale.
Yeah.
The pale has been moved. I'm now I'm picturing like a tin pail. We're gonna just kind of move it back and forth on the field. And I can understand like different thresholds for different purposes. So for recognizing your humanity, all right, the pail can be here. For having a conversation with you, the pail can be here. For doing this activist project with you, maybe pail somewhere else. I'm thinking out loud here. So I guess I'm still not convinced, and we're still here at the table. And was this productive? Was this meaningful? Was this fruitful? Was this a good thing for us to have done?
Yes, of course. I think so. You know, I mean, I like talking about these kinds of things. You know, I like voicing my ideas and listening to other ideas and things like that. I really do. And it's not about, I mean, it'll be fine if I convince you, but it's not really about that. You know, it's about other people listening to this this podcast, right? Listening to what's being said, coming to their own conclusions, right? I strongly suggest they actually read the book and not take my renderings from, you know, memory of a
or
chapter
mine,
I haven't looked
from
at.
selective quoting.
What's that?
Or my selective quoting.
Or selective, yes. I strongly suggest you actually read the book and take all these things in the context of the entire book. But nevertheless, I think it's productive in several ways. And I don't regret it at all. You know, even if we disagree on something, we're not disagreeing on something beyond the pale. You're not insisting that I'm subhuman. We have different.
Nor you of me.
Right.
So I guess I disagree strongly enough with enough points in your book that I wouldn't recommend it to people, except who else am I going to recommend who is offering an alternative, like a strongly anti-racist alternative? And I think we have to have disagreement as part of the discussion. And I think that the fact that this is one of the few books that is offering this kind of disagreement, I guess I would concede that is evidence in favor of what you're saying.
I'm trying. That's all I can do.
Well, I really appreciate you having this conversation with me. It's not every day a writer wants to show up and say, "Hey, do you want me to record my disagreements with you?" I'm gonna tell you.
I mean, I'm really serious when I say I wish this could. If there was a line of people disagreeing with me, like if after you there's another guy for an hour and then somebody else, I would be fine with that. I would take a Saturday and just talk to a bunch of people who disagree with me. I mean, this is what this is. This is academic discourse to me. I thought it was academic discourse to other people. I don't know if I was correct on that or not. But yes, I like this. This is fine.
Well, thank you for talking with me. Is there anything else that you'd like to add or say before we go?
I don't think so. Really? Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Stop infantilizing students of color. There.
Me specifically, or was that to everyone?
No, not you. To whatever listeners who do that, stop doing that. Okay.
Well, good luck on writing your next book. and I hope we'll get a chance to talk more in the future.
Let's do it again. Maybe I can explain myself better on some points.
Okay, well, I'll look forward to it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. So long.